One of the things that has fascinated anthropologists for a long time is kinship and how people make their families and how different that looks across cultures. I was studying adoptions and informal adoptions, child circulations in central Peruvian Andes. It turns out that it's actually quite common that young kids will go and live with other relatives or with some acquaintance in the city to try to make a better life for themselves or for all kinds of reasons. And so while I was there, I saw that of the few adoptions that were still happening, many of them were going to Spain. What I basically did was take that entire project and expand it to an international level. So instead of looking at kids going from one house to another, either informally or via the state, I started looking at people going from one country to another, either to become part of a family via adoption or to work via labor migration. So does that have any implications for what their experiences are of being racialized, of being treated as minorities as they grow up in Spain? We often talk about adoption as in these two clear categories. Either it's domestic or it's international. And one of the things I found in Spain is that those are a lot blurrier than we imagine. So a domestic adoption ought to be a child born in Peru, adopted by Peruvian parents who remain in Peru. And an international adoption ought to be a child is born in Peru, crosses a border, and is adopted by somebody in another country. But I found a couple of different sort of subcategories that made this all seem much messier. And one was what one of the adoption directors referred to as domestic adoptions with certain multi-ethnic characteristics. So those are the children of Latin American immigrants born in Spain who are placed for adoption in Spain and are adopted by Spanish parents in Spain. That sounds like a domestic adoption, but what the adoption director is signaling when he talks about those multi-ethnic characteristics is the fact that the kids may not resemble their parents. And so that reveals that some of the assumptions behind the split into domestic and international adoptions, those sound like they're categories that are about nations and borders, but it seems like maybe they're also categories about race. That sort of alignment of race and nation is much stronger, and I found that very striking. And then similarly, the idea that international adoption is not only international. So if you're internationally adopting a child from Peru, but you're also Peruvian, if you're a Peruvian migrant who lives in Spain and you're adopting a child from Peru, that child is going to have a really different experience and an upbringing and context than if he or she is adopted by a Spaniard. So that was something I was really struck by, that the fact that domestic and international, firstly, it's not so clear-cut, and secondly, it's a way of talking about race in national terms. Some of the adopted youth, as they grow up, get treated as migrants, get read as immigrants. And that's very jarring because they don't grow up being told they're immigrants. I've done, as I said, 8 months of ethnographic fieldwork in Madrid on this project over the last 4 years. And I published a book about it, which is called Adoptive Migration. And what remains to be finished is taking those findings back to Peru and finding out in Peru what happens when people come back. So there's another phase of the project that will be taking place in Peru.